how Canadians are viewing real estate, it's changing and changing at an increasing pace. Toronto's pre-construction condo sales have collapsed to their lowest level in over 30 years. We are leaving developers drowning in 57 months of unsold inventory. Building permits are plunging across the country. Ontario down 18% and BC nearly 25% lower just month over month. It's ultimately grinding future home construction to a halt. With prices continuing to be the systemic problem, solutions are being sought out. A new proposal that could save buyers up to $68,000 on brand new construction has come to light. And now land prices are starting to see notable drops. On top of this, we have troubling news from the jobs arena from both Canada and the US. Plus, there was a recent landmark Indigenous land ruling in BC that could ultimately rewrite the very definition of property ownership. This episode is about the structural changes taking place in real time that could reshape how Canadians buy, build, and even own their homes. Let's dive in, starting with an update on the Toronto pre-construction sales. And I know we talk about this a lot, but it's very fluid and very consequential. So right now, the sale of pre-construction condos in Toronto, it continues to sit at all-time lows. There is currently a record 57.4 months of inventory in that sector. The long-term average is around 10 months, meaning that there is about 5x the amount of inventory versus absorption in that marketplace today. We're sharing a graph on YouTube to demonstrate just how dramatic that change is. It's basically a hockey stick shift straight up that really showcases how unique of a situation the industry is really in. And in real estate development, time isn't just money. It's money twice over, right? Because when a finished unit sits on the market unsold, developers, they can't free up their equity to start up the next project to keep the bloodline going. And right now, pre-construction sales that normally fuel project financing, well, again, they fall into their lowest level in more than 30 years. This isn't just a housing market issue, it's like a credit flow problem. When financing slows for developers, it ripples out across the economy. GDP takes a hit, construction jobs disappear, and municipalities lose revenue. We're already seeing the impact, right? StatsCan reports 22,000 construction jobs already lost. And if sales absorption rates don't pick up soon, that number is all but certain to climb.
And when we look at building permits, with no sales comes no liquidity to build new projects. And that data is really starting to be shown. StatsCan also just released the June 2025 building permit data. The total amount of new permits has dropped by 9% month over month. Building permits have seen a 5% month over month drop or more in 3 of the last 4 months. When you zoom into Canada's largest provinces, Ontario saw a significant 18% drop in permits month over month, and BC a whopping 24.9%, effectively 25% a quarter. The erosion of the construction industry is happening in real time. We are seeing it happen right in front of our eyes, and the development of new homes in the pipeline is grinding to a standstill. And what's more, it leads into inventory. So today, the slowing of new construction won't feel necessarily like an issue, especially in a place like BC. Vancouver currently has the most unsold new construction units in Canada, and it's by a large margin. Vancouver sits atop at 4,200 units. Next, you have Montreal at 3,000, Toronto at 2,800, and Edmonton at 2,500. The West Coast also has the most unsold units per 1,000 people, meaning in Chilliwack, 1.73 people per 1,000. Kelowna is 1.7, Edmonton 1.59, Abbotsford and Mission at 1.56, and Vancouver sitting at 1.51. It's crazy stats.
Yeah, on a per capita, the West Coast has far more inventory than the East. And I'm actually surprised we've had a lower amount of price decreases compared to the East Coast. Well, about Toronto. Based on that metric, you'd think, with a higher per capita amount of units available, prices would be more volatile. But hey, lots more to come in that arena. Now, because we know prices are too high for the average consumer, and a big part of that comes from the amount of taxes and fees that it takes and costs to build a home, right? What is it? A third, 33 odd percent is the number that's generally accepted as how much of a new construction home goes towards fees and taxes. And so they've been kind of a target. They're in the forefront right now as to an area that might be potentially improved upon to help increase the level of affordability. So right now, the way development cost charges are paid, it's ultimately changing, or at least there's an advocacy group for this. So instead of the developer paying them, a homeowner would pay them directly to the city at the time they buy the home. Now, I know that sounds radical, but before you get upset about this concept, if it was implemented, it would actually save home buyers tens of thousands of dollars. Because right now, if you buy a brand new home in Canada, you are paying those same DCCs. You just don't see them, right? They're absorbed into the final cost of that home. Under this current system, developers pay the DCs when they get their building permit, and they don't just absorb that cost, right? They borrow the money, they pay interest on it during construction, and then they add their markup so that the project remains viable, profitable. And finally, they roll all those costs into the final price of the home that the home buyer pays. The problem is, once these DCs, these development cost charges, are buried inside the purchase price, they get hit with extra layers of tax, GST, land transfer tax, and even more interest if you're taking out a mortgage. So they are literally taxing on top of a tax and interest on tax. And so all of that ultimately adds to tens of thousands of dollars on the real cost of your new home. Here's what a direct to buyer development cost charge system would come into place. So instead of these DCs being hidden inside the purchase price and being taxed on top of that tax, they'd be billed directly to the buyer. So clearly listed as a separate line item, right? So you know exactly how much you're paying to the city. But here's the key. Those development cost charges would be rolled into your mortgage, not added to your closing costs, right? They'd be exempt from GST and exempt from land transfer tax. And you'd be protected from any development cost charge increases during the construction phase, because the DC amount wouldn't be part of the purchase price, so you'd be avoiding the tax on it. You'd also avoid paying the developer's financing costs and markup on those same charges. So let's use a simple example. Imagine a new home in British Columbia that has $150,000 worth of those development charges. Under the current system, by the time you add the developer's interest, profit margin, and then taxes on top of that, the real cost to you could be as much as $68,000 more than the actual DC amount. Under a direct-to-buyer system, that $150,000 remains $150,000. You finance it in your mortgage, skip the tax on tax, skip the extra interest, and skip the markup. Same home, same DC rate, but way less cost to you. So let's use an example of an $800,000 condo. The cost savings to the buyer is in the range of that foretold $68,000. Doesn't sound like so much of a bad idea anymore. This isn't really just a theory, okay? The Large Urban Center Alliance, this is a group of 13 major Canadian home builders, they're already pushing the federal government to adopt this system. They argue it would lower the cost of buying a new home without reducing the revenue that cities get from these development charges. In fact, because it makes new construction more affordable, municipalities would actually see DC revenues rise as more homes get built and sold. So the biggest challenge, well, it's not the math, it's getting all three levels of government to work together. Federal, provincial, and municipal rules would all need to be aligned so that the DCs are mortgage eligible. Number two, DCs are exempt from GST and HST and land transfer tax. And three, buyers are protected from mid-project development charge hikes. But if implemented, the system could make brand new homes tens of thousands of dollars cheaper without changing a simple DC rate. It's maybe a rare win-win that municipalities get to keep their funding, developers keep building, and buyers get a big break on the final cost. In today's market, with affordability at historic lows, this kind of change would be a game changer for buyers looking at pre-construction homes or brand new builds. So obviously, I think I'm for it. It's a good idea. And when you're talking about as much as an 8% decrease in the final purchase price, I mean, that's something that you can take to the bank. Now, next up, land prices. When it comes to development, one area of pricing that has the highest chance of seeing prices lower is within the land. You see, construction costs and city fees are relatively fixed, so land becomes the variable. When we look back to 2018, The buildable square foot price of land within the GTA, for example, has averaged around $100 per buildable square foot. That we have just seen a notable decrease in within the recent trades at almost half that price. $52 per buildable square foot, significant lowering. And that information was gleaned from 15 sales recorded within the last quarter and represents the lowest quarterly figure since the group that's tracking this, Bullpen and Battery, they started tracking this back in 2017. But even at these lower prices, it is still extremely difficult to accurately value development land. So all we can say with certainty is that land prices are unquestionably trending lower, and that lower more accurately reflects what is obviously happening within the current market. And absolutely, we are experiencing that in Vancouver as well.
Yeah, I really like that idea, Dan, that DCC plan. I like it a lot more than perhaps us paying DCCs with income taxes or borrowed federal government funds that have already been taxed to pay more tax with tax. I just that seems crazy. This actually seems like a legitimate breakthrough in maybe some fixed pricing controls, which I think is really cool. But all of that may be a bit of a moot point if we run out of jobs. So let's talk here a little bit about Canada and the US job numbers, because they're not great. And Canada's latest employment report is another sign that the labor market is losing steam. It's happening across multiple regions and sectors. Nationally, employment fell by 0.2% in July, with 41,000 jobs lost, bringing the total employment down to 21.02 million. The employment rate slipped to 60.7%, and while the national unemployment rate is more or less holding steady at 6.9%, that's still near the highest level we've seen since the pandemic. And when you begin to peel the onion layer back, the quality of these jobs tells a bit of a different story. The country shed 51,000 full-time positions and 39,000 jobs in the private sector alone, meaning much of what's left in the job market growth is coming from part-time or seasonal work. And youth employment continues to suffer tremendously, with unemployment among those aged 15 to 24 hitting 14.5%, just over 14.6%, the highest since September of 2010. That's excluding the pandemic years. But British Columbia was hit particularly hard, losing 16,300 jobs in July. That's a 0.5% decline. The provincial unemployment rate is now climbed to 5.9%, and when you look at Metro Vancouver, it saw a much deeper 2.2% drop in employment, with joblessness rising to 6.1%. Those numbers show weakness not just in rural or remote areas, but right in the heart of the country's largest and most expensive housing markets. Wages are rising, but modestly, and the average hourly earnings has increased a mere 3.3% year over year to just $36.16, which may sound like good news, but when you consider what inflation is running at, the rate of new money expansion, many workers are simply just losing their purchasing power by comparison. The other thing, too, is the total hours worked was up just 0.3% compared to a year ago, highlighting how stagnant this labor market truly is. Pressure, then, would be mounting on the Bank of Canada to deliver a rate cut in September as an effort to stimulate the economy and the labor market while keeping inflation in check. In short, Canada's labor market is cooling pretty quickly. BC and Metro Vancouver are showing sharper, more pronounced signs of weakness. And unless we see a turnaround, the ripple effect will hit housing demand, will filter through consumer spending, filter into economic growth, and this will become harder and harder to ignore.
So this week, there has been obviously a lot of headlines in the news regarding this Indigenous ruling. And it's ultimately, it's a landmark decision within British Columbia that could shake the very foundation of how property ownership works. The BC Supreme Court has granted Aboriginal title to the Cowichan tribes over a significant portion of land within Richmond, including areas owned by the Crown, city, and privately, signifying that some fee simple or private titles may be defective and invalid. This is the first time a Canadian court has declared that Aboriginal title can override fee simple title and potentially invalidate existing land ownership, signaling a dramatic shift in legal precedent. Now, although private homeowners were not targeted in this case, the ruling raises obviously profound concerns. A well-known Richmond farmer, former councillor, Mr. Harold Steeves, expressed that this isn't just about land. It's a major blow to farmland security within our province and underscores the urgent need for negotiated treaties rather than courtroom battles. Constitutional and property law experts warn this could unsettle the entire real estate framework. For decades, fee simple ownership, the most robust form of Canadian property title, it's been the bedrock of investment, financing, and home ownership. But now, the government's ability to reliably guarantee that title is being questioned. There is an 18-month moratorium in effect, right, giving stakeholders time to negotiate an orderly resolution. But still, I mean, this ruling creates uncertainty that could impact mortgage approvals, financing, and long-term confidence in property as a secure asset. I mean, this obviously matters to home owners and home buyers, right? Like title security may be less absolute, especially in areas without those historic treaties. Homeowners and buyers could face legal battle like ambiguity, relying more on court outcomes than traditional title systems. Municipalities and lenders may hesitate to finance or develop properties in certain areas. This precedent might extend across BC's vast treaty-free zones and even ripple into other provinces with similar gaps in land agreements. So while the province has already filed an appeal, and this will probably go on for years, this decision signals a fundamental shift of how Canadians might view property rights and how they might soon change. And the stability of real estate ownership may need to be even re-examined. So look, it's a bit too early to really know. I mean, this was tied up in the courts for, I believe, 5 years, apparently the longest court battle in history of our province. There's going to be all sorts of further outcomes, but obviously it's going to unquestionably shake or further shake the confidence in the idea of bringing investment into British Columbia, into any type of land or farm, as mentioned. And sort of like, no matter what side you're on or what your position is or even thoughts on this, I mean, it is going to make people within the province question the stability of ownership in BC. And I think at a minimum, it probably will put a bit of a further freeze into the ecosystem, right? Okay, well, what's going to happen now? Because if I can literally have title taken away, well, it makes you question whether having that title has any value to it. So very loaded topic, understandably, and I hope we get lots of feedback on other people's thoughts on what might happen here and what it means. But very fascinating to see such an unprecedented ruling take place in our lifetime. Ryan, have you been catching this on the news as well?
Yeah, I have. I guess a few things come to my mind. Sort of, where did we draw the line? Where does this sort of thing stop? I mean, when it's funny because in the last couple episodes, we talked about how you've got developers that are trying to solicit foreign investment and have it allowed back in. Well, I mean, rulings like this, who's going to buy? It doesn't matter, if you allow foreign buyers or not. If this is the kind of way that we're going to treat home ownership and, the way people are trying to plan their lives, you're not going to get any kind of foreign investment or local investment. So this will dry that whole thing up very quickly. Where does it go? That's one thing. I think you touched on a very interesting part there too, which is confidence. I mean, what do markets need in order for investment? They need confidence and stability. And this is the complete opposite of that. This is actually likely going to shake the confidence of many Canadians in their own government and many sort of shake the confidence in the court systems and what people have, people have worked very hard to save up and try and buy a very expensive house in places like Richmond, only to have that now potentially up for discussion about whether or not it's theirs to go forward. I don't know. There's a lot of unknowns here, and I just don't know what are we trying to achieve by this, I guess, is what I'd like to know more about.
So obviously a lot going on right now, and we will keep as up to date on this as possible, share what we find and uncover. But it is an ever-moving landscape. And like I said, you start to feel it out, boots on the ground now when you're talking to people. And again, there's sort of wait and see mentality is being more galvanized because there's a lot more to wait and see about. Mm-hmm. I think that's a fair point. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and watching. Have a wonderful week, and we will see you here next week.